Hello, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome John Thwaites. John is a wonderful concert pianist. He is also the head of keyboard at Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. Wonderful to have you here, John. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Julia.
It's been an uneasy time. I actually, of course, want to talk about the lockdown and the online teaching that you surely had to do at the Conservatoire.
Yeah, I think what's happened there is that we've all been fast-tracked into the best practice, getting our Skype and Zoom and setting up our studios so the Wi-Fi works and so forth. And of course that was all happening, but it wasn't that all of us were as fully engaged in it as we might have been. So what's interesting now is what that means for the future. I think it means not that face-to-face teaching is ever going to be replaced, but that perhaps we can replace some of the long-haul flights and have a slightly more ecological approach and a more responsible approach to our lives. Because actually, when it's properly set up, you can do a serious amount of work in this way from home. So I imagine that's the way things are going to go, and that will be a benefit of what we've all learned in the current situation.
Have you done any online teaching before this lockdown?
Well, that's the shocking thing, you see. No, I hadn't. So I was behind the curve, as they say, and I had to catch up quickly.
What was the kind of most challenging aspect in that?
Uh, well, well, to be honest, my pianos are quite a long way from the server, so it took me a while to realise that I was the weak link, that the students often had better Wi-Fi than I did, and that I needed one of these Wi-Fi whole house packages. Not everybody has that problem, but my house is very rambling. It's great for piano because the pianos are distanced from the rest of the house, but that's a problem in terms of Wi-Fi. Anyway, that's all sorted now,
Yes.
and on one goes.
We had a very interesting interview with Mari McLachlan, who said that if you have a really bad Wi-Fi or really not great service, ring them and demand your rights. Because I think I also actually I did the same because we had problems, and this does miracles. You just complain and suddenly everything is much better.
Well, that's good to know, isn't it?
Yeah,
I did
exactly.
have a fairly recent upgrade to my telephone line, so I think some of that work's been done.
And on the slightly kind of different topic, which I think it concerns many now, is the protection of our ears. I know that many people have troubles, especially after wearing headphones during teaching. So if you have any sort of interesting advice with regards to this.
Well, I've looked into this a bit, and it's partly again driven by my own experience. So I have continuous tinnitus now, not the worst continuous tinnitus, but still. And that is a symptom of damage in the inner ear. And I'm fairly sure that's been caused by piano playing over the years. And what's interesting is, of course, because my chamber music life, I work a lot with people who are working in orchestras. And they think about this more, and they're equipped with necessary protection and all the rest of it. And they think about how to cut down their daily dose. So when you look into the science behind this, it's expressed as decibels, an average decibel measure for a certain period of time. So there are some legal things. There's an 80 decibel over 8 hours exposure, which is so-called lower exposure value, and 85 decibels over 8 hours, which is the upper exposure. And then you need to know that the decibel scale is logarithmic. So when you go up 3 points on the decibel scale, it doubles the energy in the sound wave. So the practical side to this is, if you're at the upper exposure value of 85 decibels, which for 8 hours, you could, the same damage would be done by 88 decibels for 4 hours. Or to put it more positively, if you halve your exposure to dangerous sound, that's the same as taking 3 decibels off the sound that you're exposed to. So what could you do? Some orchestral musicians wear earplugs in rehearsals, but not in concerts. So that is a way to, because the rehearsals on the same day as a concert, that's a way to limit their daily dose, which is pragmatic and sort of makes sense. There's a lot of complicated advice about not taking the earplugs in and out too much, because we have some natural mechanisms for narrowing the ear canal. But amongst other things, it comes down to what size of piano should you be working on in what type of space. And as somebody who loves big pianos, I think I've concluded now that anyway, a proportion of one's work had better been done on a quieter instrument, especially if we're stuck for space. And the other thing I would say is it's crazy not to have earplugs with you at all times, because if you're in a very small space with a very bright, out of condition piano, you're not going to do any serious work on that anyway, so you may as well have your earplugs with you. And I've been through all the earplugs with my own experience, and I do think it's massively better to go for the custom molded ones, which is the ones where they take a little imprint of your actual ear with wax, and then you get through the post the product that's perfect to fit your ears. And all professional musicians need to know that that is available at massively subsidized cost, almost free, through Help Musicians UK. So there are all our orchestral buddies going off to Help Musicians UK, or you can also do it through the Musicians Union and getting their more or less free custom molded earplugs. And a lot of pianists don't even know about it. So I'll strongly recommend all pianists, first of all, to look into this more. There's all sorts of stuff out there. There's the government sound advice on the Health and Safety Executive website. There's all sorts of stuff. BAPAM, the British Association of Performing Arts Medicine, are coming up with a major new piece of work. I think it's just gone live on their website. So there are all sorts of things to think about, but one thing you really should think about is getting off to Help Musicians UK and getting your own custom molded earplugs, because then if you are in a dangerous situation, you can protect yourself.
Wow, that's very interesting. But what do you think about using also headphones? That can damage your hearing, right?
Okay, so there's a lot of evidence that about, I think it's, what is it? There's some scary percentage, which I won't quote because I can't remember the exact figure. Some scary percentage of young people have already damaged their hearing by using earphones or earplugs with the volume too high.
Wow.
Now, I don't know, I have a feeling that most classical musicians are slightly more sensitive to sound, so they wouldn't perhaps do that to themselves. I hope they don't do that to themselves. But that's, I mean, of course, one of the things that everyone says about hearing damage is that you don't notice the symptoms till it's too late, because all the damage is irreparable. And once you've got the symptoms, by definition, you're too late. And what you have to do is to be smart enough to look after yourself a bit before you get the symptoms. And that's difficult to get across to young people. But looking back at my own past now, I was far too, I mean, I didn't go to that many school discos, but they did come around once a year or something. It was the odd nightclub experience. I don't think it's too smart to accept a situation where you come away with tinnitus. It's not smart. You should have these earplugs with you. So apart from going straight to the ears and using earplugs, the other thing you can do is think about things at source. So something which is an old trick for pianists, but I hadn't thought about much. Although actually, I remember my teacher, Sulamita Aronofsky, sometimes doing it. You take the music desk out, you completely close over the piano, and then you have to put down a little blanket or something to stop scratching, and you put the desk back on the top. Now you watch a little bit that you don't crick your neck, but it kills a lot of the piano sound, and it works for some pianos better than others. Some sound too caged, others sound great. So I do that with one of my pianos. I know that Tim Horton, the pianist with Ensemble 360, he has a Steinway Model O in his house in Kidderminster, which I've played, and it sounds great closed. You know that the piano underneath is beautifully toned. You don't really miss anything apart from some of the volume. And that's how he does all his work. And as he points out, it's also great for the neighbors.
Sure. And you are the head of a very busy department. So how did you inspire your teachers, first of all? And this is a very difficult situation for teachers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had to go through some very difficult decisions, including what to do about assessments and end of year examinations and all that. And once we decided that we were going to stick to the examinations at the same time, but do it by video submission. That meant that there was a certain motivating factor for the students, and that they needed the support of the staff, and that they had their normal deadlines to work to. So in a certain sense, that all fell into place. But one of the problems was students that were stranded in Birmingham. So we had 30 students stranded in Birmingham who couldn't get flights back to the Far East or whatever, and didn't have pianos and couldn't come into the conservatoire. So we bought 21 electronic pianos and got them delivered to the students' flats, where sometimes they were sharing. And many of them had to make their exam videos on the digital pianos. So that was also a learning experience, because I had to change my mind about quite what it's possible to do on the electric piano. I mean, some of the results were quite staggering, actually.
Right.
But that was one of the initial complications. But I think also, sorry.
Yes, I wanted to say, any particular pieces that you particularly enjoyed or listening to on the digital pianos?
Well, there was a fantastic Kindersehnen, actually, from a pianist called Pan. But anyway, there was a massive amount of stuff. I mean, it's not only those 21 keyboards, probably about 40 of the end of year submissions came in on digital pianos. So that's been unusual. I'm not sure I necessarily want to continue with that particular aspect of this situation. But still, for what students can do when they, when they have to. And of course, there are many advantages of digital pianos, the obvious ones, like they stay in tune, but they also, you can have them at any volume. They're great for the neighbors. You can work with them in close quarters and put headphones on. You can work with them privately, So I've changed my view of them somewhat.
Yes, that's very interesting. And tell us a little bit more about the video exams. Actually, this has been probably the entire program had to be filmed, right? All the requirements that you had previously. Yeah.
Yes. And we had to come up with a very complicated series of rules. So we decided no editing within movements, because we wanted some aspect of a continuous performance, but we did allow editing between movements, partly because we didn't want to add undue stress to students at a difficult time. And they made varying use of that. Some of them decided to give a performance that was straight through without edits, so then we had to compensate for the fact that they weren't editing between movements at all. And others took advantage of what was allowed. So that assessing it all, I mean, we said to ourselves at the beginning of the process that, okay, we would have the expertise to judge somebody who was playing on a quite cheap digital in their flat, bouncing up and down on the bed, because they couldn't even fit in a chair. And that we would somehow be able to judge that with somebody who got hold of a concert ground Fazioli in the Far East and made their video there. And, we did our best, but it wasn't such a straightforward thing to compare those two. Sure. It's a bit like apples and pears.
Yeah.
But we all did our best, and we had the approach that we better give the student the benefit of the doubt at the end of the day, which we did.
And I'm sorry to ask, and how did you discuss, with your other colleagues? So did you have like a Zoom chat in the real video? It's just very interesting to know the nitty-gritty of the process.
Yeah, so we replicated as much as possible the normal process, which is someone like head of department, which was me, an external examiner. We had a wonderful pianist called Jacob Fickert, who's also fantastically experienced with that thing. And then the internal generalist, who has an idea, an overview of the procedural side, and also an overview of how the different departments measure up with each other. And then, so in real life, we'd have the three people in the concert hall. We'd do a blind mark, and then we'd have a discussion. And the only difference here was that we could listen to the video at a time to suit ourselves. We submitted our blind marks to the generalist, and then we had the Zoom meeting to discuss the blind marks. But it was slightly more complicated even than that, because we decided that in the situation where some poor sod was playing the digital piano on their end of their bed and someone else had a concert ground, that we ought, as a fallback position, to also have written reports from their principal tutors, sometimes they have two, sure, and the head of department, with an estimated expected sort of mark, which I suppose is what's been going on with some public examinations, GCSEs and A-levels and things. And then we holistically, as people like to say, took it all on board and came up with an agreed mark. That was quite a complicated process, but I think it was as fair as we could make it in the circumstances.
That sounds very impressive, and congratulations. And I think it just demonstrates that if there is needs, anything can be achieved, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did feel sorry for some pianists, of course, didn't have access to a piano for a month, either because they were stuck in quarantine or because it took them a while to get home or because it took us a while to get the digital pianos that delivered
Sure.
to them. So, I mean, it wasn't without its difficulties. But in the
Sure.
end, I think everyone. And the nice thing about the way we did it is that we can now move on,
Yeah.
hopefully, to a slightly more normal, new normal.
Sure, sure. But so just to ask you, September looks fairly normal for you, or you don't yet know?
But we don't yet know.
All right.
Um, I mean, in the rest of my performing life, uh, so for example, I play in the Primrose Piano Quartet. So there's only four of us. Now, we have our own festival in West Nyon, and we have a large committee, and so there are all sorts of people involved in that sense. But in the sense of deciding what to do with our festival, we were able to move a bit more quickly than a big organization. So we decided we had a big 10th anniversary planned with all sorts of guests, Michael Collins, Steve Sterling, Roman Kosyakov, all these people. So we cancelled all of that because we thought, okay, we're not going to take that sort of risk in early September. And we reshaped all our performances so that they would be an hour long. So we didn't need to provide toilets and refreshments. And we thought, okay, so now it's just us. We can handle whether we get a fee or not. The church is big, assuming the church is open, which we still don't know for sure. We can place people at a distance and all the rest of it. So that's the current plan, that the festival is completely reshaped, but we'll probably go ahead.
That's terrific
And that gives
news.
us something to practice for, you see, during our shutdown months when we're doing much more practice than usual.
That,
We've put in some extra challenging works because this is the time.
what are the works?
Well, the big one for me is the Chausson Piano Quartet because that's a challenging part. And it's a challenging piece in every sense, actually, musically and technically, and it's going to require a lot of rehearsal. So we figured that whatever happens, we'll take the risk of making a bubble for rehearsal purposes.
But
And it's a good time to get on with that.
I'm really delighted to hear that, and I think it's also just wonderful that sort of quartets and I mean forget the orchestras, it will be more complicated, but not just solo pianists, but chamber groups, they're getting together and starting actually planning something. That's really absolutely delightful to hear. But I must ask you, of course, about your rehearsing. So what is the situation at the moment with your quartet?
Well, we're not rehearsing at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, you see that everyone's making their own, apart from trying to follow, obviously, the government advice, which we have to do, we're also all making our own assessment of risk and, things are going to change a lot in July.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we're anticipating that we can make all those bubbles and do that rehearsing, but we haven't started yet.
Hmm. I just was wondering because maybe you've done a Zoom session or something, and I wondered how that went.
Well, we did. Well, there was something that went out on our YouTube channel, which was the four of us being a bit creative with technology, and then two of us went on and did an even more creative thing with technology. So that was in the early stages of lockdown when there was a certain fascination, but I think that time has probably passed. But I must say, there are for someone like me who is normally a bit over busy with a lot of distracting thoughts on my mind. Actually, I've been aware in recent years that when I sat down to practice, I wasn't actually being mindful. There was all sorts of other things going on in my mind, and I realized that I wasn't able to focus properly, and it was a concern for me, but I hadn't really done much about it. And in the early part of this lockdown, and especially in the early part before all the Microsoft team meetings got going and all the teaching got going, in the very early 10 days or so, I found my way back to a mindful state, which I'm hoping I can keep going because it's much more satisfactory. In a way, it reminded me of what it must be like for children. You know, that they see the instrument in the house and they go and play it because they like playing it, and they're not end gaining. Well, they might be end gaining a bit for the next lesson around the corner, I suppose, but basically they're sitting down and playing because they enjoy doing it. And so one of the things that happened to me in the early stages, well, I found my way back to that simpler state of being, which was quite rewarding and which I hope to keep. And the other thing was that I had time to think a bit. So, for example, I'm working on César Franck violin sonata, although I'll actually be recording it with Alexander Bailey, cellist. And this is a piece that we all play all our lives. And I remembered that 3 years ago, and it was 3 years ago, a very fine young American pianist, Edward Leung, said to me, you know, there's an issue about notes in the second movement. And I parked that in the back of my mind. And then at the beginning of lockdown, I thought, well, what did he mean? What is this issue with notes in the second movement? And I got out my score, and it's actually bar 27.
Okay.
In bar 27, which is the second piano solo after the cello or violins had their first go at the theme. As you go between the first bar and the second bar and the third bar and the fourth bar of that passage, there's a semitone drop in the melodic line.
Okay.
Now that's there in the recapitulation, but it's not there between the third and fourth bar of the exposition. And then the note in question, beginning bar 27, I'm fairly sure should be a C flat. I think there should be the same semitonal drop, but everyone plays C natural.
Sure.
Because it's in the score. All the scores on IMSLP have the C natural. And all the great pianists, I mean, you know, scores and scores and scores of them play the C natural. And it's not like it sounds like an obvious wrong note. It's just that if your attention's been drawn to it and you've had the time to think about it, perhaps because you've been in lockdown, you become fairly convinced that actually we should be playing a C flat. So then I started traipsing through YouTube recordings. I'm thinking, who's going to play the C flat? You know, I'm interested. Corto probably going to play the C flat, but Corto doesn't play the C flat. He plays the C natural, and not only that, his own edition of the piece for four hands has the C natural. So there are all these great thinkers, musical thinkers, who are happy to play the C natural. So then, so to cut to the chase, who plays the C flat? There's this wonderful old French pianist, Blanche Selva, who I've started to look into a bit. Her name came up because I'm now moving some of my historically informed performance practice thinking from Brahms, where I've been for a bit, with people like Ilona Ibenschutz, Adelina de Lara, Carl Friedberg. I'm moving a bit to thinking about the French equivalents, because I'm thinking a bit about composers like Chausson and Fauré to be the next recording with the Primrose Piano Quartet. So she, for whatever reason, plays a C flat. And there's also a wonderful Russian pianist, Rosa Tarmakina.
Tamarkina, yes.
Yeah. Well, she plays the C flat. And then Marta Argerich, who's been playing the piece all her life, and wonderfully, she plays a C flat. So then it became clear that there were one or two people who, for whatever reason, and it may have been that they'd thought about the musical logic of it rather than that they had access to different editions. I don't know. They play C flat, but in an incredibly small minority, you know. But I think now, my feeling is that some of the latest editions are coming out with a C flat. So, for example, Christian Zimmerman on YouTube, he plays the C natural, like so many people have been doing for so many years. But at the same time, there's rolling on YouTube the score, and the score has a C flat. So I think some of the latest editions, I don't know whether it's Henle, Berenreiter, Wiener Urzix, I need to look into that. But I think things are changing. So, for example, I noticed that Kevin Kenner in Verbier in 2016, he plays the C flat. I'm definitely going to play the C flat. I mean, I'm committed to that now. But obviously, well, I say I'm committed to it. I obviously need to do more research so I can justify it. And I need to find out what's going on. And I can't actually, I'm irritated I can't find the manuscript anywhere yet. I think it might be in New York. So these are the sorts of things where lockdown gives you a bit of space to finally catch up with yourself.
Fantastic! It sounds so fun, and I must say, it's remarkable. And I have the score just behind me there, so I will definitely have a look and see.
Bar 27.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Very exciting. And I'm sure, you could write very interesting, if you record this, a very interesting foreword. I'm sure that will be a great, great sort of thing to put. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Um, but
That's
yes, let's come back to the historically informed performance practices you mentioned. So tell us more about it. I must say, I heard about these things, but it's nice to talk to someone who really kind of understands it and does it. Hmm.
well. What's interesting about it is the way the academics can have an influence on, the. So one way of looking at conservatoires is that they slightly stereotype what's the received wisdom about how things should go. We might actually be closing down possibilities for students whilst we're educating them, which would be depressing if it were to be true. And I think one of the ways to break out of that is this historically informed performance practice side, where you look back and see how differently things were done in different countries and also in different time periods. And then it's extraordinarily complicated to work out what that means for us in our time. But of course, one of the great joys about it is that some of these old recordings are just unbelievably magical in their own terms. So with Brahms, we've got recordings from people that heard Brahms play and that worked with Clara Schumann. So they had a very direct line. And there's quite a lot of material. And now it's all freely available. But the trouble is you need to know which names to search. Otherwise, you never get through all the stuff to find it. But it is there on YouTube. And you listen to it, and it can be quite extreme. It can have extreme asynchronicity between the hands, dislocation. They can do a lot of arpeggiation that's not written. They can do a lot of very free playing in terms of rubato and agogic stuff. So, for example, it seems that they never played a hairpin in a rhythmically straight way. They would be agogically inflecting the hairpin. So they'd either go forward with the crescendo and back with the diminuendo, or the opposite. They would stretch into the middle of the hairpin, which can work quite well with small hairpins in Brahms. And I do think that quite a lot of modern pianism is slightly straight-laced rhythmically. Now, whether we want to go back quite to the freedoms that they had in the old days is another matter. But if you just look at a hairpin in any score that you're playing and think, would I actually enjoy agogically inflecting that as well as dynamically inflecting it? It's amazing how liberating that can be. So with my piano quartet, the Primrose, we had a symposium which we held at the Conservatoire because academics there were involved, for example, Professor Ronald Woodley. And we invited in some of the people that at the cutting edge and at the cutting edge of the more radical end of looking at this. For example, Dr. Anna Scott and Claire Holden and Kate Bennett Wadsworth. And we talked all this through and we challenged ourselves and we put ourselves towards the guinea pigs because we were about to go and record the Brahms piano quartets in Vienna. So we played. We actually have a piano made by Clara Wieck's cousin, Clara Schumann's cousin, Wilhelm Wieck, from the 1850s, which is
At
on
the
loan to the
conservatoire.
Conservatoire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we used that to play, and we gave a performance which was perhaps somewhat conventional, and then these experts said, "Yeah, but you're not. I mean, that's just like conventional playing. Where's the historically informed part of that?" And then we were challenged to push the boundaries, and then we took quite a lot of those pushed boundaries into what we did in Vienna. But of course, in
Sorry,
the chamber,
I find this extraordinary. So basically, if I understand this correctly, so you, in front of, I presume, all of your, colleagues and faculty and students, you said, this is it, this is what we kind of, how we play, and then you were like literally torn apart by these people who said, is this roughly how it went?
but I mean, this is, we all have to be prepared to keep rethinking things, don't we?
It's fantastic.
That was very inspiring, actually, and it's something I want to keep going with myself, and also, as I said, perhaps move beyond Brahms into other countries and other times and other composers. But I'll stick with Brahms because I haven't actually. There are 17 Brahms chamber music works with piano, And I'm not quite sure how many of them I've recorded, but it's definitely nowhere near 17. There's definitely quite a way to go. I mean, all sorts of things come into this, like the instruments. So we were able to use instruments from a private collection, a chap called Gerd Hecker, who's in Vienna. And he has, I think, the largest private collection of Austro-German pianos that's suitable for this repertoire in the world. And also, of course, it's just somehow very nice to do all this sort of thing in Vienna.
Yes.
So, for example, he has 7 Strykers. So Stryker is the piano that the company very cleverly gifted to Brahms when he settled permanently in Vienna in 1868. They gave him a Stryker. So since then, everyone associates Brahms with Strykers. It was a good move by the firm at the time. So one of the piano quartets, the G minor, we recorded on an 1870 Stryker that Gerd had in his collection, which was exactly the same model as the one Brahms had, but perhaps more importantly, just sounded like the perfect piano for Brahms. And as far as I can tell, in my experience of Strykers, they come in 2 sorts. One is this slightly more mellow sound, which seems perfect for Brahms, and the other is actually quite a bright sound, which is perhaps better for Liszt. But the Stryker was fantastic. And then we recorded in Vienna in a hall that had been the manufacturer's hall for Erba, which isn't the name people know. But it's a bit like Widmer Hall used to be Bechstein Hall. Sure. And so Erba was this manufacturer. And we know that Brahms used the actual hall to play through symphonies and piano concertos on 2B pianos, because they were heading towards Steinway sound. And in fact, some of their people went on to work for Steinways. And Gerd had a fantastic, beautiful Erba piano in his collection, which we were then able to take back to the hall where it would have initially been sold from. And there are all these sort of exciting little parts of history that came together.
But don't you feel closer to Brahms playing on this instrument? I mean, I would. I just literally last week done a recital at Cope Collection, in Catchlands. So it was just a delightful visit and concert on these old instruments. It's just, yeah, my discovery. I've played a Chopin's piano years ago, but maybe I wasn't, I don't know. It didn't mean much to me. But now I've played the Chopin's piano. I recorded myself, and I sort of listened to it, and I said, gosh, all these rubatos I do, they just don't work, or like the interpretation. I think this piano requires a completely different interpretation. So I feel actually very passionate about this. And I only started feeling passionate about it because I was at the RCM. They have, of course, historical performance department, but I wasn't into it. But now I think I really would like to discover more. It's such an interesting world.
Well, I mean, and it's our instrument, and it gives us an insight. For sure, as Robert Levin would say, if Beethoven had the modern Steinway, he may or may not like it, but he definitely wouldn't have written what he did write. So it's interesting to know what they had, but it's also interesting for us to think what our own idealized conception of piano sound might be. So initially, when you go back to these pianos, one might think that they sound a bit thin, or they lack a bit of resonance, or this or that. And sometimes it takes a while for your ear to adjust. And I have a feeling for some people that go out and want to buy a CD of their favorite piece, they may not want that sound. They might be shocked not to have the Steinway sound. But for me, what's important is how it inspires you to, well, for me, the best of those instruments are just really inspiring in the way that a great Steinway is also really inspiring. But to find instruments that are that inspiring is not so easy. And then, of course, there's also the balance thing. So it tends to work better with strings, these period pianos, because they're not so hyped up. And then it means that the string players can use gut, which is a very exciting part of the whole process. But whether in the future we could the piano sound has got stuck, basically since the war, with everyone chasing the Steinway ideal. And I think that's a shame. And I wonder if it's time for us now to explore some different directions a bit more. And also, of course, we must take care of the old instruments we've got. There are old instruments all over the country that are being literally chucked out on scrap heaps. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them could probably be restored if we had the technicians and the will.
Mm.
And even simple things like ivories. I mean, obviously, we're not going to shoot any more elephants now, but when the ivories are there on the keyboards, it seems a shame that they go to a skip.
Mm. It's a beautiful touch, the ivories. I must say, I really like it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, John, it's really fascinating this, and this can, we can have, I think, like hours of the discussion. Perhaps we can, carry on in another topic. But I'd love to ask also about the Cadenza music school, summer schools that you're the head of. I know it hasn't been easy.
Well, I've been running that for over 20 years. And the irony is that well before COVID, I decided I needed a break. I just wanted, this is partly of what I was saying about my mind being over busy and the joys of lockdown in terms of getting your focus back. But I'd already decided with this summer course, which is a huge amount of administrative
Of
work
course.
and a certain responsibility as well, because it's piano and strings chamber music. So it doesn't work if you're a few cellists short or whatever it is. So I thought, right, I'll have a year off, rebuild the website, rebuild the financial support for students, because the bursary aspect of it is critical, as with all things, up the level, revisit exactly who's going to be there. And so I'd already taken the decision that we weren't going to have a course until 2021. And now, of course,
Oh.
now, because there was a slight concern that that might mean we lost momentum and people would go off to somewhere else. And in fact, some of them asked me, where should I go? But now, of course, none of that comes into play because everyone's cancelled. So it's great. It couldn't have worked out better. I didn't have the stress of setting it up before it had to be cancelled anyway. And I have made a certain amount of progress with the new website and moving things forward. So that's just great. But also, I must say, it's a great course. Wouldn't I say that? But we've got a wonderful faculty. Students come from all over the world. We have a lot of people coming back year after year, which is lovely. And it combines solo work on one's lesson, which can involve also concert opportunities, masterclasses and all that, and chamber music. And actually we do some string orchestra as well, but that's somewhat icing on the cake because the serious work is the solo stuff and the chamber music. And to have that flexibility is not that common. And we also have a large age range. We start from 10 and we go right through to amateur adults with a sort of focus. Mostly the focus is mid-teens to end of conservatoire. And that has its interesting aspects as well, because of course some of the young ones are playing their virtuoso pieces in a way that shocks some of the conservatoire students. But conversely, some of the conservatoire students can become role models for the younger ones. And it's actually quite nice that the mix is that broad. So it's a course that I'm very fond of, but I just got slightly stale and I decided I wanted a year off. And now it couldn't have worked out better.
It's
The
so interesting. I said it's so
well,
interesting because, we've interviewed another great member of the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire, Peter Donoghue, who actually said that, he had an injury in his shoulder and he would have cancelled all the concerts, literally, in March and April and onwards. But he hadn't because they were anyway cancelled. So in a way, it's really funny, this kind of fate things that, works interestingly. Yeah.
I mean, I think probably quite a lot of people. I mean, it's very easy for me to say because I have a salary, So, I mean, of course, a lot of our colleagues are going through very difficult times financially. But I think anything that causes a major rethink like this will have its advantages. But going back to your question about September, I think if things go on for much longer now, it'll be getting just into more sustained negative territory because there are big problems if people don't go to conservatoires and universities in the autumn, for example. So, but I mean, it seems like we may be heading in the right direction globally, hopefully. Well, not globally, because globally things are getting worse, but in those countries that have gone on top of it.
Yeah, no, sure. But I also discovered that the academy has been now opened. I mean, for piano, I think students, but the Royal Academy of Music in London. So that was nice to see. Exactly.
Yeah, that's very positive, isn't it?
It is, and you take this as a really quite kind of an inspirational thing that it's possible to move forward. Um, but it's of course, as we are now touching this topic, really strange times. So, do you have any sort of tips for students who are stuck without, let's say, performances, or maybe also recent graduates? Because I think that is a very hard time at the moment for anyone who has graduated, or maybe first year, sort of out in the wild.
Yes. I mean, I think well, I mean, I'm very struck by how the students are keeping their motivation going, actually. I mean, they all somehow have the belief that the work that they're doing now will be of interest to people in due course when they're able to show it. And so, for example, some of them who have assessments coming up in the autumn have decided to learn completely new programs. They had sort of sensible programmers, half learned, half not learned, and they've thrown it all out and said, right, this is the time when I'm going to learn the Chopin sonata or the Liszt sonata or whatever it is I wanted to do. So I suppose I suppose it just has to be taken as a time to think more. I mean, the historically informed thing is one thing. Taking the time to just use a resource like YouTube wisely and think what you want to do with your playing, which is also what I'm doing up to a point, or rethinking. I mean, of course, there are other things you can be getting on with. The whole business of the internet and putting up your performances and making recordings.
What do you
But
think of that? What do you think of that sort of online presence and social media and
well, I'm very impressed by the people that have managed to make the most of that. It's not something that comes naturally to me, and I scroll through a lot of stuff on Facebook. But when it's someone I'm interested in, of course, I have a listen, and I'm very moved, And again, it sort of shows. I mean, this is the fascinating thing about recording, isn't it? Because I'm thinking for this front recording, okay, I want to be in the greatest acoustic, and I want the most inspiring concert grandstand I've ever come across. And I want the fantastic producer, and I want the sound equipment to be top notch, and all this stuff. And I still do want all of that, but then you have to recognise also that someone's done something very moving on a little out of tune upright. So it's horses for courses. In the end, I still believe in the top, in the full production value, state of the art situation, especially for a piece like the Franck. I mean, nothing else is going to cut it, is it?
yeah, of course. Well, it's really, really interesting. I mean, last question, really, if you don't mind. What is, if you have any, your prognosis about what's going to happen let's say, in the UK in the nearest future, in terms of concerts?
I think things like the chamber music will start up because it's bubble thinking, and we all want to keep playing. I don't have a clear idea about what's going to happen with orchestral stuff. For example, at the conservatoire, they're not planning any orchestral stuff this side of Christmas, and they don't know yet about the other side of Christmas. I mean, some of this is a bit group think, isn't it? Because we know from the early, before they decided that football matches definitely couldn't go ahead, there was a science that was saying, well, okay, there are thousands and thousands of people there, but you're outdoors and you're only standing by 5 of them. So I don't know. I mean, when Mark Elder came on to the Day Today program, he was pointing out that people often attend concerts in their own households or partners or whatever it is. So you wouldn't need to socially distance everybody. And anyway, the socially distancing thing's about to change. So I think it's going to depend, isn't it, on whether there's not so much a second wave, because we haven't finished the first wave, whether the tail of the first wave goes into resurgence, and whether the contact tracing business actually is professional enough and rigorous enough to work. If it all goes according to plan, which is perhaps more than we can hope for, I have a feeling that things are changing, and of course people will have to make their own decisions. So here am I at my age and with my, uh, I mean, I'm reasonably gun ho about it, but I'm reasonably gun ho anyway. I'm probably slightly over gun ho, and I have the greatest respect for the people who will want to take more care of themselves. And people will have to make their own choices up to a certain point, and that includes the audiences, whether they turn out or not. So, for example, in West Meon, we have people on the committee who do have underlying health conditions and are of a certain age, but they're saying to us, done in the way that you're suggesting, without the interval drinks, without the shared toilets, etc., and with etc., will come. So if they want to come, or a proportion of those people will come, we'll get. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the virus. I'm definitely not an expert on the virus. But things seem to be changing. I have medical friends. I have some good medical friends whose advice I try to take seriously, and they're going to take their chances to go down the pub.
Well, on this positive note, if you don't mind, we'll finish. And thank you very much um, for this delightful conversation. Fascinating, really. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank
Indeed.
you for having me. It's been a great
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye bye.